Hey listener, today's guest is Sarah, an outstanding animation student who also produces a warm princess story called The Princess Plot on Webtoon Canvas. This enthralling series is about a princess who wants to experience freedom for just a bit longer ahead of her upcoming marriage to a prince she's never met before, and the princess's maid who finds that pretending to be someone you've known all your life is still not very easy. We have a packed agenda for you today, but previewing the episode, Sarah shares her philosophy on making something you love without thinking too much about numbers, the notable evolution of her art style within the series, why comics don't necessarily need dialogue to tell a good story, and the future of the series as she enters her final year as an animation major in uni. Here's Sarah.
Hey, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are really excited to have you and to talk about the Princess Plot. Why don't you start by just telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Sarah. I am a current full-time animation student. I'm going into my senior year, and I'm a Webtoon Canvas creator, where I'm publishing my current series, which is titled The Princess Plot.
So, what made you get into sort of animation as your study for school?
So I've always loved drawing and doodling as a kid, and I would fill up notebooks with lots of scribbling. And so I guess it really started as more of an interest in art in general. I took art lessons for a while, which included painting and like more formal techniques, although I did not really enjoy that. And then my push to digital art really came from doing fan art, and just wanting to draw what I loved. And that included Disney characters and Pokemon as a kid. And, this whole Disney obsession became me wanting to do animation, because my dream as a kid was, oh, it'd be so cool if I could become a Disney animator.
Mm.
So I decided to study animation. I took summer courses and got my start to animation while I was in high school. And yeah, so I'm studying 2D animation currently in college, and I have a special interest in doing characters, so character design as well as character animation, as well as storyboarding.
So, there's a lot of different things that you can focus on when you study animation. What drew you to character design in particular?
Honestly, my journey in animation was not very linear at all. I actually originally wanted to do 3D animation. The
Mm.
only reason that I didn't do it was because I do not enjoy like the software part of it. And the 3D animation courses, you have to create and like model and rig your own characters, and it's super technical. And while I love pure 3D animation, like just puppeting the figures around, it's really hard for me to do the rest of it. And so I was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to study 2D animation because that at least gives me a foundation for animation principles in general. And if I want to learn the actual software later on, then I can do that. And I already have a basic
Mm.
knowledge of 2D animation. And then the character design interest as well as storyboarding. I've always really loved drawing characters and just creating characters. I guess my interest in it kind of came from that I was good at it. And so I was like, okay, I could pursue this. And it's really fun. I really like kind of just seeing what I can create and pushing character design.
In terms of your art style, how would you describe it?
My art style, I think it's really interesting because, and it's visible in my comic that it changes a bit, but not only because of my improvement as an artist, but also just because I think I'm getting a little bit better at controlling my art style in different ways. So
Mm.
I know how to do more realistic, I know how to do more cartoony, and I'm always trying to strive to have a really broad range because I think that's really important, especially in terms of character design. So I think I would say fluid in how it looks. I really like, achieving fluidness in my characters, but then also being able to switch between those various art styles. I've always seen art style inconsistency as a little bit of a bad thing, but I think
Mm.
I'm starting to see it like as a strength, and I'm able to switch between those.
Becoming an animator is incredibly demanding as it is. What made
Yes.
you go into webtoons and creating your own webtoon?
Well, for one, animation and comics actually have a lot more in common than I thought they would, especially
Mm.
going into it. Because before I started doing Webtoon, I really had no experience at all with comics. The actual like push to get into making the princess plot. It's actually not something that I've told very many people, but I'll talk about it here. I started publishing the comic in July of 2021. And about a month before it, I actually was rejected from Webtoon for an intern position.
Mm.
It's actually, so it's a bit ironic, but since I had already at that point been so interested in Webtoon at the time, I decided that I'd finally try and make my own comic. And so it was a bit of a backwards push, that rejection. Yeah. And so since I'd been reading on Webtoon for much longer than that, it's also always been something on the back of my mind, because it is just another format of storytelling like animation is. So I just decided to finally try it.
So let's talk a little bit about the princess plot and how you came up with the idea. You know, in your Q&A on Webtoon, you talk about your love for cliche princess fairy tales, hidden identities. So it seems like this is a theme that you've always enjoyed. But can you talk a little bit about how you came up with the story and the kind of idea for the princess plot?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before that I had a lot of ideas for web comics. I'm actually a person that likes to spend a lot of time planning stories and doing world building and character work before I jump into big projects. But for the case of the princess plot, I actually kind of forced myself to not get caught up in those details, because a lot of times I would, get hung up in doing, oh, I have to do character sheets, I have to do turnarounds and expressions. And then all of that work, you kind of get exhausted after a while, and then you don't see anything that comes out of that. So the princess plot kind of grew out of nothing. I literally thought to myself, I was like, I like fantasy, I like romance, I like hidden and mistaken identities. So all those things, I'm just going to combine that into the story. And that is literally what I got out of it. And so I did do some outlining, but I did it really quickly, at least in my standards, again, so that I wouldn't get caught up in the details. And that actually really helped me to just get over that initial hurdle, which was even creating it. And so then I just jumped right into it and started publishing.
So you talk about this. I don't want to get too stuck into something. Is the main reason behind that you just want to like start publishing and get into a routine of putting something out there, or why did you? I'm sure you have a lot of kind of perfectionist tendencies as well. Was that something you were trying to fight just so you can get the webtoon out there to begin with?
Yeah, in sorts, definitely the perfectionist tendencies is definitely evident in my artwork, I'd say. But I think it's also just because I had never done anything like webcomics before. It was a little bit of this idea of like, okay, I've never done this before. I need to fully prepare. Like, I need to watch tutorial videos. I need to figure out how to use the software. I need to do this and this. And it was sort of like all these, I guess I was making excuses and saying like, oh, I can't make it because I don't know how to. So forcing myself to kind of forget all of that and just learn as I made it was really what made me able to keep going and keep publishing.
And what's your process for coming up with characters? Because that can be really tricky for individuals. And obviously, you mentioned, earlier, when it comes to animations, it's like characters and characters design that you like, and everyone's process is a little different. So, how do you come up with realistic characters?
My characters, I think I put a lot of myself into them. And so it's like a bit of a mix of creating them to serve the plot,
Mm,
as well as giving them personalities that I am sort of familiar with so that it's a little bit
mm,
easier to write them. So my characters, I didn't have like any particular inspirations or anything. They were just, at first created to fill their roles in the story. I had my original story idea where I need a princess, I need a maid, I need a prince, right? It was very,
hmm.
very rudimentary. And then when I was writing the story and when I was figuring out the events that I wanted to take place, I sort of worked backwards a few times where I want this specific scene or this plot point to take place. And so, in order for this to happen, then a certain character has to have this certain personality trait to react accordingly.
Mm.
So, it's sometimes a bit of working backwards, and then also it's a bit of the characters just driving the story themselves. I feel like sometimes they control the story more than I do, just because I don't know, I have a lot of fun writing them, and they just kind of take control sometimes.
And what sort of audience or reader did you make the Princess plot for? Did you have someone or some type of person in mind?
I never had a specific audience in mind when I say that the story is largely self-indulgence because it's is almost literally just for me. I wanted to make something that I really loved because that's the way if I make something I love, I know I will want to work on it. And so because I was just really, checking off boxes of every trope or every like type of character that I really enjoy, I never actually expected to have a lot of people also enjoy it, especially when it was something that felt so personally catered to myself. But I think it really just shows that, when you make what you love, you naturally put in a lot of passion and time and energy into it. And then that audience just kind of gradually follows. And that if you enjoy it, there will always be other people, maybe more than you think, who will also enjoy it.
One thing I wanted to pick your brain out on with the characters, Alina, Mia, Kieran. How did you come up with the names for your characters?
Oh, that's a good question. I am a big proponent of the baby names websites, and I do this actually for a lot of my characters. At least for fantasy, I don't like to give them very, very specific like racial backgrounds or anything because it is hard to say or to like relate that to a fantasy setting. I think representation is important, but it's a bit different when it comes to fantasy and when it comes to me writing my own, kingdoms or nations.
Mm,
So I sort of strive for a blend of different characters. And
mm,
so specifically for Mia, she is an Asian character. I am an Asian American creator. So I do put a lot of Asian characters into my story.
mm.
And so I think some of those names followed from like popular, I don't know, popular Asian baby names or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the last names? Because I noticed, at the end of certain chapters, you'll have a little bio. I always love when people do that. So thank you so much for doing that. And you do introduce, at least, obviously this is a fantasy world, but last names from different cultures. Was that a very intentional choice on your end too, speaking to that theme of representation is important, but you also want to create this fantasy element. So how did you think through the last names?
Yeah, that's a good question because you're right about the representation part, and that a lot of, or a few of the characters that that I have a certain image in mind of in terms of representation, I have chosen last names that at least like, in our world reflect certain ethnic groups or nationalities. But as for sort of figuring that out, I don't know, sometimes it's like fantasy generators, right? I use a lot of generators just because it's easier, it's less time consuming. I don't know, a lot of them are I chose like for like my royalty characters, I did do some research into like more European names just because it is a more European fantasy,
Hmm.
as a lot of princess fairy tale types are written, because that's where I'm taking my inspiration from. I'm not sort of taking it from any specific culture, and
Hmm.
I don't want to say it is from any specific culture because that's just not true. So yeah, so it's a bit of a mix of both of real world and trying to work in representation, as well as just keeping that fairy tale aspect. It's a bit of a tricky balance at times. Sometimes I can't even figure out like, should this character be, have a last name that's like noticeably, a little bit different than like these European ones. So it is a bit tricky, I would say.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It reminded me a little bit of, I haven't seen like too much Bridgerton, but it reminds me of like,
Yeah.
taking the setting where you see a certain type of character usually, and then, kind of modernizing it with what you see a bit more in the world today. So I really, really enjoyed that. Well done to you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Another thing that you poke a little bit of fun at yourself with this art style shift. And I was just flying through the story that I was like, oh my gosh, it is like very
Yeah,
apparent
it's
when you like look
huge.
at it. But I was just flying through it, so I didn't even really notice when it kind of shifts. But can you talk a little bit about, why you were like, okay, I need to change and evolve the art style a little bit here.
Yeah. So I think the reason why the style shift maybe isn't as apparent to some of my readers, especially if you're reading it quickly from the beginning and then all the way up until now, is
Mm,
because it's mostly a reflection of my actual growth as an artist. I took about a 4 month break last year when I went back to school in the fall. And then when I came back to it, all the drawing that I had done from schoolwork meant that I kind of had a better eye for what I was drawing. And so then, I was able to kind of shift that accordingly. I also think the style kind of shifted because I was still figuring out what I wanted it to look like. So you'll notice that my early chapters are very short compared to now. I mean, they're getting really long, which is
Mm-hmm.
another topic in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But because they were so short, I didn't really give myself the chance to explore, I think, different stylistic options. And then, like I said, because I really didn't do much planning and I didn't make character sheets or guides, I just really didn't know what style I wanted. And I've had a few readers ask if I could share character sheets, and I can't say yes because I don't even have any. So because I literally jumped into it with only a few rough sketches of the characters. And so now that I've sort of have more experience, now that I am more comfortable drawing my characters, I think it's a little bit more stable, and I've kind of headed in the direction that I'm more comfortable with.
You mentioned a little bit, about the episode length. What you do as a creator is super impressive because, getting to 40 panels a week, we've talked to folks who do that both on the Canvas side and obviously, originals artists are doing 40 or more panels a week. It's incredibly difficult to pull that off. So with your schedule, how did you arrive at, what, I'm gonna do 40 panels a week?
Honestly, I never think about panels, and maybe it's because I'm not a contracted originals creator, so I don't have to hit a certain number of panels. I'm setting my own length. I'm setting my own update schedule. So the reason that the chapters sort of got gradually longer and that the updates are getting a bit long is mostly because I my writing is just getting longer, and I just am trying to fit more in. Again, like I said, the characters drive the story. Sometimes they're talking and I can't, like, it sounds so strange, but I cannot get them to stop talking. Like, I have to let this play out, and I really want to touch on certain topics, or I want to really get an idea across, so then it kind of naturally becomes longer. I would like to keep it short because of my sanity, because of my own workload, but at the same time, I really do want to deliver a good story, and I think I'm okay with taking a little bit more time, a little bit more effort to make it longer if I need to. And also, I am currently on summer break right now, so I do have that time to actually put in. Princess Plot's kind of like my summer job, so.
By the way, I am not at all saying that you should make them shorter. If you need to make them shorter to kind of balance your schedule, I'm supportive of that. But I don't want angry readers coming after me saying that you're convincing me to make this shorter. So that's not at all what we're trying to do here. But you talk about chapter 19. At the end of that chapter, you say, I've wanted to share this moment for so long. I guess I'll warn everyone. There's a little bit of a spoiler here, but you talk about this as your favorite chapter. Like, do you mind going into why you wanted to share this moment so much?
Yeah. So when I write, I like to have, or actually, it's more that I have certain scenes in my mind, and I'm like, okay, I want this to happen. So how do I work up to it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this chapter specifically, I think I just like it because in terms of cliches, it's got like one of my favorite romantic fantasy cliches, which is having a ball only to escape the ball for a more private, setting. Something about it. I don't know. I'm a big fan of having, a huge grand party, but then most of the action happens outside of it. And then I also think personally that how I see it is that the communication between the characters, between Mia and the Prince Kieran, I think the communication within the chapter is really important to the story. I think it's also like a kind of a turning point chapter, like a marker of like this growing friendship between them. Even though they said they would be friends in a previous chapter, I think from 19 onwards is when it really starts to show in the story. And I personally just really enjoy their dynamic and writing their dynamic.
Yeah, I also like just like all the scenes or the panels rather where you just have them blushing. It's just like it just comes through the screen. I've really enjoyed it. And I like how you kind of tell a lot even without much dialogue. Is that something you've worked on and that you picked up? Because obviously in animation, a big thing that I'm guessing you think about is how do you kind of show then having folks tell things through dialogue? Is that something you think about consciously?
Yeah, definitely. I do put that in there because as you mentioned, in animation, that's really important, and that's been stressed to me so much, especially because a lot of the times I am working, at least in terms of animation, I'm working in a non-dialogue setting.
Mm,
So a lot of it is told through character acting and through staging alone. And I think the more that I work on my comic, the more that I'm seeing like, these similarities between animation, between storyboarding and character animation with comics, and that how those are applicable. And so, yeah, so I'm just starting to become more natural for me to just throw in those panels that have no dialogue and just are very driven by the characters themselves, because I think those are, just as important as dialogue heavy ones. And even though dialogue tells a lot of information, especially for exposition and for, general communication between the characters, I think that, the silent panels also tell a lot about, how they're feeling. Maybe they don't even say it themselves, but you can read it between the lines, I guess, and just see it in the drawing itself.
yeah, one other thing I wanted to touch on about the story itself. You talk a lot about representation. You have a lot of LGBTQ plus representation within the story as well. I know you also kind of call out and it. You said if you don't want this type of story, like please go follow another story. That
Yeah.
you're creating a very specific kind of environment here. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of representation and what it means to you? Because another thing I've enjoyed about your comment is like you look at your comments and you see your fans and how much they enjoy it and the little things that they pick up that you leave for them. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that side of representation as well and what it means to you?
Yeah, definitely. So my main character, Mia, is bisexual, and it is not a secret. And so the story of the Princess Plot, it has really become a place for me to really explore bisexuality and like my own bisexuality. For the story itself, Mia has both, possible male and female love interests. And it's become like my safe place, I guess. Like when
Mm,
I say that it's self-indulgent, it's also in this way,
mm,
where I'm talking about queerness and I'm talking about bisexuality. So it's, it's my safe spot for me to say it's okay to like both. Here's a character that's just existing, that's, like me. And I'm really glad a lot of people can relate to that and see themselves in the story and in Mia. And I'm not trying to send, political messages or anything. It's more of a story where, queer people can just exist, and just have stories rather than their entire story being about, coming out or dealing with homophobia. Because I think those are important as well, but it's also just important that, that we have spaces where we're allowed to exist, and it's become an escapist fantasy. And yeah, like I said, I just want it to be like a very safe, wholesome, and welcoming place for myself and for my readers who are always commenting that they find themselves in it. I think it's really touching, and I'm really glad that they do.
yeah, it's fun to just watch that environment come to life, and credit to you for creating a space like this because it's not easy to create something like that people love. And it's been fun to read and be a part of that space as well. So I've thoroughly enjoyed that. One other thing, you've been doing this for a year now. You have over 10,000 subscribers. Can you talk a little bit about what you expected when you put episode one out there versus where you are now? How does it feel
Yeah,
to have gotten such a big audience?
yeah. So like I said, since it was for me, I really did not expect anything. So because I've shared original characters in small comics online before, but really never anything complex or long term. And I started a bit as a fan artist, right? And so, every now and then I do a piece of fan art that would go viral within the fandom, and like that's awesome. But having people care about your own original story and your own characters, it feels a lot different. And for me, there's I always have so much excitement in seeing my subscriber count and my comments,
Mm,
because it still to me sometimes feels like these characters only exist in my head. So the fact that other people are really relating to them and are enjoying the story is a bit surreal to me, even now, even though it's been over a year. But yeah, I think it's just really proof that I love creating it, and so that's why other people love it as well. But yeah, it's just really rewarding just seeing people that I don't even know leave so many comments and tell me that they enjoy it since I started publishing it, and then up until now.
We're going to make things a little bit more surreal. On your podcast debut, you have fan questions. And we love doing this because you see how excited people are to ask you questions. So we got 3 for you. The first one is from Mike's16. Who's the character that you relate to the most?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit. I like to put a little bit of myself into a lot of my characters, because then they're more familiar for me to write and to work with. And I think that also makes them a bit more relatable if they are more realistic. The characters that I guess I put most of myself into are definitely Kieran and Mia.
Mm.
They both have bits of my personality in them, so there are definitely instances where they will, react to something or say something where I just really relate to them, and that's mostly me speaking to the character.
The second question is from Krishna Ramani, and it's, how do you do the world building specifically for TPP?
Yeah. So the Princess Plot again has very little world building. I only really do that. I only kind of flesh out the world more if the plot needs it.
Mm.
So for example, I know that I needed a way for Mia to be able to take Alina's place without anyone in the other kingdom recognizing her, that she's not the real princess. So I just kind of threw in quote unquote world building to say that, the two kingdoms don't have much contact with one another.
Yeah.
Therefore,
Mm.
no one has met her, knows what she looks like. So world building is kind of, at least for this story, is done as I go along, and it happens as I need it to in order to serve the plot and to further progress the plot.
Last one is from Megs Chung. And what is your creative process when writing the plot and character backgrounds and designing the characters? I know you talked a little bit about this, but is there anything else that you may want to add here?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have much of a process, at least for writing. I usually just I either like sit down and write, or I just will have ideas come to me and I'll just make sure I pull out my notes app and write them down. Again, for the plot, I have certain events and major plot points that I know I want to happen and that I've always known that I want to happen. And a lot of those are just like cemented into the story. So they're sort of my anchor points. And then I just try and figure out what happens in between and, how that leads up to a specific scene. And then when writing characters, it is a little bit more ambiguous and less straightforward. Again, like the world building, sometimes I add things to their character backgrounds specifically just to serve the plot. So again, like an example, Mia grew up in the palace as a servant because it helps, with the believability that she would be able to function in a similar environment of the other palace while pretending to be the princess. So it serves her character, but then it also serves the plot. And then, yeah, like I said, a lot of times the characters drive the story more than I do. So that means that, I write them and I write their personalities, but then because of the ways that they would react to certain situations or that they would act, then I have to, sometimes go back and adjust my overall story plot outline to fit those changes. So it is a very fluid and it's a changing process.
Hmm. One other question. In terms of learnings, things that you've learned throughout this process, like, can you share a little bit about like what you've learned just by doing and putting a webtoon out there? It's one thing for you to watch tutorials on how to do things. It's another to actually, put yourself out there and put a story out there. So what do you think your 3 biggest learnings have been for putting a webtoon together?
Well, first off, as I've mentioned a few times already, that, just do something that you love. It'll pay off. It'll make you want to create more. Definitely. It's been for me seeing that this is really just a passion project and seeing how well it's done. It's just been very encouraging for me to continue to pursue doing what I love. Second, I'd say that for webtoons, people read those things so fast. And I put a lot of time and effort, and I think, it shows in the artwork. And I'm always very, very appreciative to my readers who will comment like things like, oh, I really love the art in this episode because, you know, that makes me happy that they're looking at the artwork and not just, you know, scrolling, looking for dialogue and then scrolling. But it is a little bit of a, you know, you have to learn how to manage your time, and you have to sometimes let small things go. I definitely have lots of panels that I'm like, okay, this face looks a bit wonky, but I don't have the time nor energy to sit
Mhm.
and fix it. And people are only going to look at for 2 seconds, and I know I'm my biggest critic. So just taking that and, you know, just allowing myself to say, okay, it's fine. We're going to move on. And then the third thing is just really using my resources. I use Clip Studio Paint. I love Clip Studio Paint. I've downloaded so many brushes, and you know, they've helped so much. And I think there's always this bit of fear that using references is considered cheating, especially in newer artists. But I think the more that I've created, the more I've learned that, you know, it's not cheating. It's using your resources. It's working smarter, not harder. You know, using 3D models and everything like that. If it helps you, I think you should put it in your process, especially for something like a webcomic where it's so time involving and it's so much work.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, supporting yourself as an artist is really difficult. And there's kind of two different themes I want to talk about here. The first one is just keeping up with the workload. Now, you know, most Canvas creators, they have something else that requires their full-time attention, whether it's a job, whether it's school, you know, they're not just focusing on their Canvas story uh, in most cases. So what has it been like for you to juggle both of these things? And do you have any things that you do to kind of take care of yourself and give the space that you need to recover in between creating episodes?
Yeah. So I am a full-time student, but my comic has become you know, my summer activity. So it started that way when 1 year ago when I launched the series, and it's currently still like that. And that's why I'm able to do long weekly updates, because I'm not in school, I'm not really doing much else. So that is basically my main focus. And then while I'm in school, I tried to work on updates slowly in my free time, but you know, as a few of my readers know, because a few of them following along since the beginning, is that I did put the comic on pause for an entire 4 months last fall, just because I did not have the time to work on it. So for me, honestly, it's a little bit less of juggling and more of like, okay, I'm focusing on one thing at a time.
Mhm.
But you know, sometimes being able to make those calls and saying, okay, I know I need to put this on hold is really hard, because I don't want to stop working on it. I know that my readers don't want me to stop working on it. But you know, for my own well-being, for my own mental sanity, I have to. um
Mhm.
yeah, I know when I was in school, in my spring 2022 semester, my updates were still pretty infrequent, but I had a little bit more time to work on it, you know, very slowly. And what I would do is that if I had extra time, I would just give myself like, okay, maybe 3 hours at the end of the day to just work on whatever part that I was working on. And then it would slowly, usually over a month, would come together. So yeah, again, the weekly publishing schedule is kind
Yeah.
of a blessing because I will not be able to keep that up. Definitely not when I go back to school. And just managing that, in terms of taking breaks, I've started doing a new system, at least this summer, where I make a massive single chapter. And the reason why they're so long is just because I've been writing them really long, because again, the characters are driving it and the plot is getting a little bit more involved and I want more things to happen. So they are getting a lot longer. But because they're getting a lot longer, what I've been doing is that I've been able to knock out one of those really long chapters in like a week and a half. And then I will
Mm.
split that chapter in half. And then I'll queue them for updates weekly. And then this system has definitely allowed me to work, you know, more like an originals creator, where they have finished episodes that they're sort of sitting on and they're ready to be published. And then while they're working on future updates. And for me, this works really well, because then I have the stockpile of updates ready. And then I feel a little bit less rushed to work, and I'm able to take longer breaks in between updates and avoid overworking myself.
One very wholesome thing that I saw is you put a poll to your readers on Webtoon, and you're like, do you want shorter updates, more frequent, or do you want longer updates, less frequent, or do you not care and you just want updates? And they're like, we love whatever you do. And I was like, this
Yeah.
is perfect. This is literally why we're on Webtoon.
Yeah,
So
it was really nice to see that. I'm really glad that people feel that way, but also at the same time, I remember looking at that and I was like, the reason why I asked this is because I need someone to decide for me because I don't even know. But yeah, but then I ended up doing weekly, and I think it's been working out pretty well. So
And then in terms of kind of making money and supporting yourself that way, so you're a student now. How do you think about that in the future? I saw that you have some amazing haiku stickers on Redbubble. So like you've already like kind of started doing this a little bit, but how do you think about supporting yourself in the future?
yeah, so currently I have viewer ads turned on for my series, which
Mm,
means I get a small bit of revenue for when readers finish a chapter because there's an ad placed at the very end. It's not a lot, and sometimes I get bonus revenue as well from Webtoon depending on my engagement numbers. But again, it's not a lot because it is sort of a side thing. In terms of like merch and Patreon, I would love to do that. Definitely if I did comics more full time, after I graduate, that would definitely be an option that I would look more into. Currently, for me, my merch is just my Redbubble store, and that's just sort of like an off thing where it's so easy because you can just upload it one time and then you just kind of sit and it's passive income. So yeah, but I would love to do that for my comics and for my original work as well, especially a Patreon, because I think having that community as well on Patreon is a really nice thing to have, and to have readers who are subscribed so that they can receive more content behind a paywall. But
mm,
then it kind of builds my I don't want to say fan base, but I guess fan base a little bit
yeah.
more.
I did want to read you a comment that we found. It says, "Hi, you probably hear this a lot, but reading the Princess plot always manages to bring a smile to my face. A while back, before I discovered your comic, I was dealing with an eating disorder, and I was stressed while attending school and from the body standards, which caused my ED. While recovering, I discovered the Princess plot. It always made me cheer up and laugh. I would sometimes read your comics while eating my meals. I'm now fully recovered and have a good relationship with food," with a little smiley emoji at the end. I mean, when you started this journey, could you have ever imagined that this was the type of impact that
Oh
you
my
would
god.
have?
Not at all. I remember getting this comment, and I do read every single comment that I get. And this one made me so emotional because it's so surreal, right? To have even enough of a following for me to say that it's a fan base. It will always shock me to see the amount of likes and comments that I get within just 24 hours of posting an update. And I'm just, I'm definitely really think that without having that many people to support me, I don't think I would have been as motivated as I have been and as I am to continue working on it and to keep putting in so much time and effort. And the fact that so many people care about the characters in the story, it just really makes me want to deliver something that my readers can enjoy. And it's sort of like I feel a lot more encouraged to make something that's worthy of having so much attention and so much love.
So, what is in store for your future? Obviously, you're probably like, "Oh, I need to finish school," and I'm like, "Okay, that's fair." But what are all the different types of things that you want to do with your future?
Yeah, about school. By the time that this episode gets published, I will have announced the hiatus. Unfortunately, because I will not have the time to work on it while I'm being a full-time student, especially because
Hmm.
this is my final year. And as an animation student, I'll be really busy working on my personal short film, which is really cool. I'm
Oh
really excited
wow,
about it. It's going to be so
yeah.
much work. But unfortunately, that does mean I will not have any time and I'll have to put the comic on pause. And so because I am graduating, it is, a bit unclear what the future is. At least in comics, because I might get a job in animation, I might not. We'll have to see, when that happens. I don't want to give up on comics though. This journey has really shown me that it is another pathway for me, something that I sort of never realized. And then once I started doing it, I was like, okay, I actually really enjoy doing this, and it's, a viable option in the future. Um, yeah, but I would love the opportunity to work maybe, more formally for Webtoon, whether that's like an editing position or if I like somehow miraculously get an original series. But yeah, I do hope to continue, and I really hope that, I can do even more stories in the future. But yeah, whether it ends up being, on the side or if it's might becomes full time for me, it's definitely very up in the air, and we'll have to see. Unfortunately for my readers, we'll have to see what the future kind of holds for me.
Yeah, and we'll be supporting you, no matter what way your future goes.
Thank
And
you.
we're really excited. Looking forward to the future. I know it's interesting because you get one eye on like the animation industry, another in the webtoons industry. I guess in the webtoons industry in particular, is there anything that you want to see in terms of change or things evolving?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, and just the lengths and the amount of work that webtoon creators
Yeah.
have to give. And I'm sure like a lot of webcomic creators have said it, but it's definitely because it needs to be said. And that, like, the treatment of artists in the industry, it's definitely something that I want to see improved, because currently it is about 50 to 60 panels a week, which is a lot. And I'm doing usually about like half of that, maybe a little bit more than half of that a week. And I can see how much that is. And especially, when that's something that's read in less than 5 minutes, it feels overwhelmingly large, right? It's a huge amount
Hmm.
of work. So I definitely think that the industry needs to give creators more time in between updates. Maybe have updates once every week rather than every single week, or maybe even shorter updates. As an avid webtoon reader myself, I know it's like really hard for readers to sometimes go 2 weeks, even 2 weeks in between updates. But I do think that for the longevity of a series, it's just a better idea to give artists more time, than to risk injuring their physical or mental health.
That's something that we would love to see as well. I mean, comic artists work so hard.
Yeah.
And it goes back to something that you talked about earlier. I look through and read, a bunch of webtoons, and it's incredible how fast I read them
Oh
versus
yeah.
how long it takes to make. And animation is all like I still remember learning, oh, for animation, like people draw every single one of these. I thought it was like absolutely insane. But
Right.
it's incredible what you all do. I did have a question. How long is your short film supposed to be for your final year project?
So the official length, I think, is like 3 to 5 minutes max. Um,
Hmm.
so far, based on my animatic, which I completed last semester, it's over that. So it's longer. Luckily for me, I have decided to take less classes, so I will be basically working on that full time. And so I will hopefully be able to get it done, but it is going to be a lot of work, especially because it is my personal short film, and it is almost exclusively being done by me. And that includes like everything from rough animation to cleanup animation, coloring, rendering, lighting, compositing, all of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot.
Are you ready to wrap things up with our rapid fire round?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm actually gonna throw a sixth question in here, which I've never done,
Oh
but
no. Okay.
yeah, you'll be well equipped to handle it. But
All
I'm
right.
I'm I'm dying with curiosity. I'll ask that one last. First
Okay.
one, which fictional character best describes your personality?
I really relate to, or okay, in terms of, I'll stay on the animation subject. I really relate to Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service. I
Hmm.
love that movie, and especially as a metaphor to creatives. I think that Kiki's journey, which is it follows her flying as her job to having her rediscover her passion for flying. It's something that really resonates with me, and I've noticed with other artists as well, especially for myself as someone who's trying to do art full time. It's very easy to get frustrated and to forget why you enjoyed doing art in the first
Hmm.
place, especially when it starts feeling like a chore. So that entire journey that Kiki goes through is just real something that really resonates with me.
Which three webtoons would you take with you on a desert island?
Oh my god. Um, so the three that I think I take are my three all-time favorites. Number one, Seasons of Blossom, which is an adapted Korean webtoon.
Mm.
I think that the writing is phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. It's such an emotional roller coaster. Second one is Romance 101, which is also a Korean webtoon. It's my favorite rom-com genre on Webtoon. And it's definitely the series that I reread the most often. And then the third one is Ras and Sass by Aunt Lorella. It's so cute, and I just love the writing in it. It covers some pretty difficult topics of growing up, of dealing with, parents and family expectations, as well as mental health issues. But it's done really well, and it's super touching and powerful.
If you could pick any creator to have dinner with, and you feel free to expand into animation as well, who would it be and why?
In terms of comic creators, Instant Miso, which is the creator of Webtoon originals Siren's Lament and currently Eternal Nocturnal. First of all, I would just really love both of those series. They are wonderful fantasy worlds that kind of take place in the real world. So I would love to talk with her, about world building like that, and also just being a comic creator, because she's had a lot of experience with it. She's got one completed series under her belt, and then she's working on this current one. So I think she would be really great to talk to as sort of like a mentor almost when it comes to doing webcomics.
What's your favorite scene from any webtoon?
Okay, so currently I am very invested in Philia Rose, The Prophecy of the Crown of Thorns, which is another adapted Korean series. It's really interesting. It's got a really good balance of humor and dark fantasy. And I think my favorite scene from it is it's like a doomsday-like scene where the main character, who can communicate with animals, she uses her power to create an omen from God by filling the sky with hundreds of thousands of crows. And it's just such a chilling scene, and it's so cinematically done. It's stunning, and it's definitely like a scene that made me gasp out loud while I was reading it.
Second to last question. If you could have dinner with a fictional character, who would it be?
Oh my god. I have no idea. I'll continue the Ghibli-chan and say Hal Pendragon from Howl's Moving Castle, because I love him.
And then my last secret question.
Okay.
Who's your favorite Haikyuu character?
Oh my god. Kageyama, definitely.
Okay.
He is like my son.
That's a good choice. I'm probably between Ishinoya and Oikawa. Not that you asked, but I was like,
No,
I don't know why.
I'm curious.
Yeah, it's kind of a good foil to your choice, but nonetheless, when I saw those stickers, I was like, I needed to ask. But Sarah, thank you so much for taking some time. Listener, please go to Webtoon and check out the Princess Plot. From there, you can go to Sarah's creator profile and you can find her link tree, and you'll be able to see a bunch of her work. I also encourage you to check out her portfolio on her site. I really enjoyed your little animated short that you've already made.
You.
So it's going to be fun for you to add your work from this year as well. But Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time. We really, really love your story, and we're excited to see what you do in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If you'd ever like to have me back, if I create another comic, I would love to come and talk about it. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any feedback or want to be featured as our next guest, please write to us at pixelsandpanelspod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, or give us a 5-star rating. See you all next week.